All right, welcome everyone. This is Tom Szaky. I'm the founder and CEO of TerraCycle and Loop, and I'm just so honored to be joined by a great group. I'm going to pass it to Lindsay just for a minute to introduce everyone and get everyone into the discussion. So we have Graham Forbes from Greenpeace. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate you being here with us today.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be here.
Also have Rebecca from Plastic Free July. Thank you also for taking your time to join us today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
And finally, we have Kendall as well from Lonely Whale. Thank you so much for joining.
Hi, good to see you, Tom.
Good to see you as well. Fantastic. So, I think instead of necessarily running this in sort of like the normal, we're going to sort of ask questions, I thought we could have, just open it up for a discussion and sort of hopefully, even explore areas that may be, a bit provocative and areas that we can sort of look at together. And I just wanted to sort of open it up and maybe just to begin by asking you, what your thoughts are, as we are in this pandemic. We are, obviously there's a lot of unknown, lots of new information coming. It's changed, I think, the narrative a little bit on plastics, on the role of single use. And I just wanted to ask, maybe as an opening thought starter from everyone to, maybe to kick it off, to get your thought on how do you see the role of plastic evolving? Do you, especially in this topical moment, and do you think that's going to just be a temporary thing, and we all go back to where we were pre-COVID, or do you think what will stick, and how do we have to adapt our thinking around circular economy, recycling, reuse, in that context? So maybe Graham will just, in no particular order, kick it off to you.
Awesome, thanks, Tom, and glad to be with everyone. Yeah, I mean, I think plastics, like many other issues, the COVID crisis has really highlighted some of the problems or ruptures that we had in society before COVID started. And so we're really seeing those sort of brought to the forefront or accelerated during this time of great uncertainty. And I think one of the things that we saw instantly was sort of the plastic industry really pushing forward this idea of the necessity of single-use plastic and this idea that it's somehow more hygienic. And so seeing that combined with folks seeing masks and being confronted with plastic pollution in new and in some ways more tangible and immediate ways, the connections to human health have really brought to the forefront the choices that we have and get to make going forward. And so during this moment of disruption, there's huge opportunity. So how governments are going to be more engaged to pull us out of an economic crisis, where are we going to invest money, the type of jobs we're going to create, and the type of economic models that are going to set us up for success going forward, both from a health perspective, but also from an environmental and more sort of social economic justice perspective. And so, yeah, I mean, reflecting on that, it's kind of one of those moments where we have a tremendous choice, and more opportunity is how we like to think about it. But again, those interests that have been perpetuating the system that we had pre-COVID are there. And if we don't sort of call on our political leaders and call on businesses to evolve and make better choices than they have, we're likely to end up where we started. And so it's a moment of great opportunity, but I think also for all of us to push really hard to make better choices that are more holistic and more collective and towards the public interest.
And just want to pass it over to Rebecca and then Kendall. If you guys want to build or add or challenge, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that whilst undoubtedly there is challenges and increasing use of single-use plastics in some ways, I think there's also opportunities as well. I'm a bit of a glass half full person, and what we've seen with Plastic Free July, as people have been forced to spend more time at home, they're working at home, they're homeschooling their kids, we're also in a moment in time where because we're at home, where we're not just shopping because it's a recreational pastime, people are starting to make things from scratch more, perhaps be less wasteful. And I also think that it is this moment in time where we're starting to realise the inextricable link between human health and environmental health, and the fact that we need to care for planet as well as people at the same time. And I think the other thing that we've been thinking about and discussing a lot is how, well, relatively good we are at listening to the science about caring for our health, yet we're clearly not listening to the science about use of single-use, use of reusable products and the risks that are there. So I really feel like that's a topic of conversation that we need to pursue moving forward, because I think there's a real imbalance in there.
Just to build, Rebecca, on what you're saying, it sort of reminds me of the organic movement a little bit. If the reason it was created was very much about sustainable farming practices, and metaphorically the butterflies and the bees and and so on. But if you survey consumers on why do they choose organic products, it's almost entirely because of their perception on their own health. It has very little to do with the reason of creation. So it sort of shows, I mean, we're very selfish actors, right? And this is accentuated with what you were saying, is that, when it comes to our own health or our children's health, it's paramount and everything is a secondary. But then as you go away from that sort of personal piece, it becomes, harder to grasp and less actionable. And I wonder, do we just have to accept people for that and then play into that, or is the strategy to shift people to try to think a bit more holistically?
I mean, I think that's a great point. I'm happy to chime in there. I think it hits right on what I wanted to say, and especially with regard to the issue around health, and this interesting dynamic between how plastic has really been, in this time of COVID, positioned as the safe option, even when the science was saying that COVID lives longer on plastic than it does on other materials. There's this counterintuitive thing. And then there's also this idea that plastic is really good for your health in the beginning, but it becomes such a serious human health issue as soon as it's done with that first single use. And it's something that we're really going to be having to face the music on coming in the coming years, because as plastic waste continues to increase, it's really on this trajectory to continue to do so. Those repercussions are going to become more serious, and it's going to have to be even more of a conversation that we've had. I mean, I think that just because COVID came along doesn't mean that the issue around plastics went away. I think there's a lot of challenges that have become presented, but it's really actually been this call to draw attention to how the plastics issue isn't just about plastic, it's about human health, it's about climate change, it's about environmental justice and equity, and who has access to renewables, reusable resources, but also, waste management in their communities and things like that. And so my response is that I would say that the multifaceted challenges that have presented themselves in this crazy year of 2020 really don't call us to shy away from the plastic problem. Really, to the contrary, they really call us to make our work against the plastic pollution issue more intersectional, more holistic, more from thinking from a systems perspective, so that we're thinking about all the facets of how we're creating systems that work better for people, so that we're just moving towards a better future that isn't one that's covered in plastic trash.
Yeah, I'm with you. And just to sort of build on that, we've been looking a lot at the back end of what COVID is creating, especially plastic recycling, and to me, sort of this whole topic is an odd one, because many times I think many stakeholders perceive, especially citizens, but also, even producers, retailers, perceive recycling as probably as it ought to be, like a public service, which means we first think about what's the right thing to do and then figure out how to fund it, say typically through taxes or tariffs or something. And the reality is recycling is not that at all. It's a private enterprise whose focus is profit to shareholders, which means what is recycled is only the things that garbage companies can make money at recycling, and what is not recycled is what they can't make money at. And if you double click on plastics are from oil. And COVID is, aggressively bringing down an already low oil price, which is making less things profitable to recycle. Not to mention that many countries have stopped importing the material for good reason, but that's hurt, recyclers even more. The quality of the waste going down in the eyes of recyclers. It's so important to note that while we're seeing this big influx that we just talked about, we're also seeing the systems that are there to help solve some of it hurting very, very seriously. Famously, I was reading an article recently where the city of Philadelphia used to get paid, as a US example, I think around $65 a ton for its traditional recyclables back in 2012. It now has to pay over $100 a ton for the same material to be recycled. And what is, the folks in the city of Philadelphia thinking, or other cities around the world, I'm sure, is, do we scale back recycling? Do we cancel it, altogether, because it's becoming a bigger cost center, overall. And I know, Graham, Greenpeace has been famous for asking for this idea of peak plastic. And I wanted, if you could take a moment on, just first for anyone listening, what is peak plastic? And in this mode, have you seen that work? Have you seen people leaning in, leaning back, especially, with what we're facing with now with, more use, maybe, some of the folks in single use saying, look, I told you, here's sort of some of the benefits, but also the system's scaling back a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I think the idea of peak plastic is not a complicated one. It's the fundamental idea that we are going to transition away from plastic. And right now we're seeing it accelerate in terms of use, but fundamentally just use less plastic. And so for companies like Nestle, Unilever, and Coca-Cola they're completely dependent on single use and disposability to exist, it's taken us a lot of work to get them over the line on actually setting reduction targets for the amount of plastic that they use. And so for decades, recycling wasn't an accident, and you just can describe it as a public service, but the companies that are responsible for so much production really put it forward as an idea that allowed them to externalize the costs of business onto communities, onto local governments, and onto individuals to sort of clean up their waste. And as long as we continue to sort of view the problem through that lens, it's going to be incredibly difficult for us to get where we need to go in terms of moving away from plastic production, which is a massive health issue, as well as waste and disposal. And so we've seen, you're starting to get some of these companies recognizing that the business model based on disposability is a financial risk, it's a brand risk, and it's something that is just, which is, I think, why they're, more and more engaging in initiatives like Loop. And so I think that's promising. But right now, every extra dollar that Nestle makes or Coca-Cola makes is tied to more plastic and more plastic pollution. And so for us, it's like, how do you crack that link so that the business model is moving away from disposability at the pace and scale required? And we just aren't there yet. And that's why we need governments to step up. We need people to come in and demand better systems. And really, these are tied to human health. It's tied to the choices that we make. And so there's a lot of opportunity, but the companies still have a long way to go in terms of breaking that fundamental business model to work.
Well, I think this is a great sort of segue, if you will. We're here, it's July. We're celebrating Plastic-Free July. And Rebecca, if I can ask you, because this is sort of what Graham was saying is an important thing, like what can individuals do to help the type of work that everyone here is doing, to push forward in a way that's actually going to be executed versus just listened to. And maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about what is Plastic-Free July? How do we take part, noting that there's a few more days left in the month? But then the bigger question is how do we take that mode and really enact the type of change that we need to see here?
So this is the 10th Plastic-Free July, not quite the anniversary celebration that we were expecting this year. So it's Plastic-Free July is a personal challenge that's part of a global movement to choosing to refuse single-use plastics. And it started with just a handful of people here in Perth in Western Australia, and has now grown to an estimated 250 million people last year took part from 177 countries. And it's really, this movement is about not just a few people making big changes, it's lots of people making small changes. And what I've seen over the last 10 years with that challenge is that as people have started to reduce their single-use plastic, they're often starting to reduce their food waste. The average participant reduces their overall waste and recycling by 5% in the home. So those small changes that lots of people are making at the same time are really important, I think, to start to change the culture and put pressure on business and government. And whilst of course behaviour change isn't the silver bullet to solving the plastic waste crisis that we're increasingly facing, I think it's a really important part of it. And time again, what we're seeing is people take it beyond their own lives into their communities and into their schools and workplaces, etc., that through starting to take personal action, that then starts to influence their wider circles. And I think this rise of the awareness of so many people and so many organisations working in this space over the last 10 years has been really testament to that. And I think, what we at the Plastic Free Foundation, what we are doing is leveraging that consumer voice to put pressure on business and government to change the system. And we're obviously not there yet, and we've got a long way to go, but we're seeing jurisdiction after jurisdiction introducing plastic bag bans, introducing extended producer responsibility schemes such as container deposit schemes, starting to get bans on the problematic plastics, including plastic microbeads, are all examples of this shift in culture that starts to put that pressure on business to take responsibility and government to set the framework and the legislation that we need in order for that to happen, and in order for them to be responsible for their products, not just in the first lifetime, but to truly transition to the circular economy. So I think it's an important part, but definitely not the full picture here.
And just to sort of put on sort of the other hat, where someone listening to this maybe from the plastic industry, and then here's a term like plastic free. What is is from your point of view, what is the where are the areas where plastic from your point of view is, and you mentioned some examples like microbeads, where it's something that we should really fundamentally divorce ourselves from, but also where is it appropriate, and where because it's not necessarily a black and white statement, I think. And I wanted to just take a moment to think about where should we draw the line on where plastic is a good thing, and where is it perhaps something that we should really be completely divorced from?
I think at its very simplest level, we shouldn't be using it when it ends up as plastic waste. I think we need to be really clear here that it's plastic waste that's the issue, not plastic itself, and acknowledge the benefits it has in our communications, in our transport, and indeed, in some instances in our medical and our healthcare systems. It's when it is leaking into the environment, it's when we're just using it once that is and we don't have those systems to keep the material in the value chain, that we're actually that it is actually becoming a problem.
Well, and this is actually, I think, an interesting pivot to the work, Kendall, you and the organization at Lonely Whale are doing, where you have a group called NextWave Plastics, which is doing really amazing global work with some of the world's biggest producers like HP, IKEA, Dell, on being able to find some of the material, I think, Rebecca, you're referencing, that has been improperly managed, ending up in our oceans or on its way to our oceans, and having these organizations actually commercialize in a big way Oceanbound Plastics. So I wanted to ask, because that's obviously we have to avoid, and I think that goes to ground what you were talking about, and Rebecca as well, what you're advocating for. But in some cases, it's there, and it's on its way. Can you talk a little bit about how you're looking at that? What is ocean-bound plastic, and why is it important that these organizations look at it? And if someone's watching this, from one of these, from a company that uses plastic, why should they lean in on this topic?
Yeah, no, I think it's important. It's an important part of like taking that systems perspective. So I work at Lonely Whale, and as a organization, we work to address this issue from a number of different approaches, everything from consumer engagement campaigns to really get people to start rethinking how they're interacting with plastic in their personal lives, to education through our Ocean Heroes Bootcamp, which really empowers young people to get up and build campaigns in their communities and figure out how to drive a shift in behavior. When it comes then to the companies that are actually using this material, we also want to sit down and talk to those people. And we really do that, as you mentioned, through NextWave Plastics. So the concept there is really that plastic is an essential part of a lot of the world that we live and work in, from the technology that we're using right now to how we get goods shipped to our houses during COVID when we can't go to the store. Walking hand in hand with those companies to really say, let's think about this differently. Let's first ask the question of how we can use less, but also where we can help to start addressing the issue. And so we've come at this from this test case of Oceanbound Plastic and really working with this consortium of companies that includes, as you mentioned, Dell, HP, IKEA, Trek Bicycles, and more, who are all committed to using Oceanbound Plastic in their products. And so Oceanbound Plastic, as we define it, is really plastic that is mismanaged waste. It is not going to be captured by a managed waste stream or end up in a managed landfill or incinerated.
Can I ask you a question there and sorry to interrupt?
No.
For someone who doesn't have a visual of what is mismanaged waste, is the can you just sort of paint the visual of what this is and how does mismanaged waste even come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're all fairly familiar with the plastic that ends up in the environment, even just in terms of walking down the street in my own community here in Oakland. There's plenty of mismanaged waste that is the stuff that maybe was in a trash can but got blown away, or somebody just checked out their car window. It's the plastic lids from to-go containers of like drinks from fast food restaurants with the straw sticking out of it. That's one I see all the time. It's the thin film wrappers for chips bags and granola bars and things like that have a tendency to fly loose. And so it's stuff that we have here. When we talk about actual ocean-bound plastic, we're talking about this waste in the places where that stuff that a lot of us see, in places like I live in the United States where we have a managed waste system. That stuff has a place to go. If it ends up in the trash can and successfully makes it to a landfill, it's going to stay in that landfill for hundreds of years. In many places in the world, that managed waste system doesn't exist. They don't have regular collection. They don't have options for ways to dispose of waste in a way that will allow it to end up properly disposed of in a managed landfill. Or, as I mentioned, incinerated. Incineration isn't necessarily a great option, but at least it makes sure that it's not ending up in the environment. It negates the ocean-bound plastic thing because it's a different issue. But with regard to that, then, so we're really focused on finding the plastic that is highly vulnerable to ending up in the ocean. So it's the stuff that is within 50 kilometers of a coast, 30 miles about, and is in places where there is like no managed waste system. So places like Haiti, many areas in Indonesia, and other places throughout the world where their managed waste streams are not allowing them to proactively collect and manage plastic waste in an effective way. But there's a market for folks who can go out and be collecting that waste, capturing it and recycling it, getting it into a recycling stream, because there is a specific demand for that plastic that is highly vulnerable to ending up in the environment. We can help to create a market that helps to turn off the tap of plastic flowing into the oceans and polluting our marine environments. And that's really been the issue that has been championed throughout are the organizations that are a part of NextWave. They're really working on creating the demand for this plastic and working with it so that they can get it into products. And it's been integrated into everything from HTP's laptop computers to Trek's bikes. They just recently have a set of mountain bike hand grips that they've released. That's exciting news. And it's integrating the plastic water bottles coming from places across the globe that would end up in the water, or fishing nets that don't have a current place to go once fishermen are done with using them. And it's really putting that stuff back to work in a way that's very intentional. Like, it's very much targeting what is most vulnerable to ending up in the environment. It's not the only solution by any means. There are so many ways that we need to be innovating towards zero waste, towards reuse, towards reduction in use altogether. But it's one piece of the puzzle where we can help to address some of the current structural gaps that we have right now. And it's a way for those companies to start really thinking about how they can think about their products and the materials that they work with differently. So that's really what we're all about.
So this raises a really interesting conundrum, I think, and I would leave it open to any of the panelists to give some input here, which is, as Kendall, you were saying, a lot of, now it's important to actually, before I say this, as backdrop, note that even the city of New York used to be dumping all of its garbage into the ocean till the late 70s. So today, a lot of this material, mismanaged waste, as you were describing, comes from Southeast Asia, countries that are emerging, living in poverty, where it's not that they don't want to recycle or don't care about the environment. It's that there is no choice. There is no place to put it. And at some point, you put it in the pile in your backyard. The rainy season comes, washes it into a canal, that goes into a river, and voila, it's in the ocean. Mm-hmm. Now, clearly there's two things. One is, of course, let's clean this up, which is the amazing and inspiring work that Lonely Whale is doing with NextWave and all the incredible partners. But of course, the other side is, how do we turn off the tap? And that goes to the type of work Graham and Rebecca, you're doing on everything from peak plastic to not using plastic. But if someone is listening to this, who lives in Bangkok, and they're they are just barely able to meet the needs of their family, how do you, and like what's the advice to the individual on the ground who has to buy their shampoo in sachets, and it ends up as mismanaged waste? What do we say to someone in that in that situation?
Yeah, I can.
Maybe we'll go Rebecca and then Graham.
I can do a quick. I just want to.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Perfect. That's worked. Go ahead.
Look, I mean, what our starting point with Plastic Free July is always, it's not prescriptive. It's always do what you can where you are with what you have. And the single use, our motto is choose to refuse use plastic, but what that looks like is very different depending on where you live and where your circumstances are. And that may be the only option for that person in Bangkok, but we're all interacting with this material on a daily basis. And so we always suggest people just start with one or two things. Don't try and do everything and look for the plastics in your life that you can reduce. And something that a figure that always staggers me is the global average of our food waste is 30%. In your country and mine, it's 40%, and a lot of that is packaged in plastic. So it's I think there's a real opportunity for all of us to be less wasteful of our food and consider what it is that we are buying and look for opportunities that we have to make changes in our own homes. And that is, I think, a message that that is the reason that this message has become so popular, because it's not right. You have to do A, B, and C, because if we start talking about coffee cups, the person in India is not going to be using the takeaway coffee cups, but it's another type of plastic that they're faced with. So I think it's keeping it real and encouraging people to do what they can where they're at.
And one thing to build on this, Rebecca, and then right to Graham on the topic is that it's so important to reflect into the past. We always think about innovation as a step into the future, and it's future, 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 and we sort of disregard the past. But one of the important things about our past is that this whole problem that we're describing only emerged in the 1950s. I mean, plastic didn't really exist, before that in any major commercial way. All of this, ocean plastic, all these issues are 70 years old at maximum. And before the 1950s, which, at least our grandparents will absolutely remember, quite well, we cobbled our shoes, we mended our clothes, we, not just our milk, but our perfume, our motor oil, everything came in reusable packaging. And we, I think culturally prized longevity, timelessness, frugality. We didn't measure our happiness by how much stuff we have and that sort of overall accumulation. And I would just encourage everyone, not just, who's listening and to share this, that, let's think about what life was like, because this entire modern problem, humanity's been around happily for a long time, and this whole thing is 70 years old as an issue. And so there's some hope potentially in that we used to know how to do this and live a happy life without this accumulation of things that last an incredibly short period of time.
If I can just if I can just add to that quickly there, Tom, we did hosted a workshop, a webinar last weekend run by a group of women in India on sustainable menstrual products, and they were sharing with us this great movement in their country of upskilling women to make cloth pads from old saris and resources and materials that they already have. So like you say, I really think there's a lot of value in valuing those skills and starting to question these products that we've been sold that we all need, that are disposable, that we keep handing over our money when actually we can just use what we already have.
Well, there's something there. I think it's a trade-off where, we have to think about the immediacy versus long run. It's sort of like a very simple example is incandescent light bulbs versus LED light bulbs, right? We may, the LED light bulb may be a little bit more expensive, but will last a long time and save us money in the long run. And in fact, many times the single use versus reusable conversation is like that, where it really is better in the long run. We just have this sort of very short-termist point of view when we decide what to buy. I want to, Graham, just pass it to you for a minute, because I think you were going to say something, and then I'm going to pivot to some of the questions from the audience, because there's been a lot of great questions, and I want to make sure we have a chance to address some of the different folks that have been asking their questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. I can keep it quick so we can get to those questions. Yeah, I think your last point and the example Rebecca used is such a powerful one and really offers hope, because it's like, there are different ways to live. And I think many of the products that we've been given you've got to question, where do those come from, and are they to serve people, or are they really to grow corporate profits? And Tom, you mentioned sachets in Southeast Asia, which I think are just such a great example of the latter. Why do those exist, and are those really meant to serve a population that has less economic resources, or is it a way for corporations to grow profits in that part of the world? And so for us, really taking a systemic approach, or looking at the system, why is it created, and why is it, who is it servicing, and who benefits, is just so important, because it's, we want to keep plastic out of the ocean. At the same time, if we build supply chains and start to generate infrastructure and make capital investments in systems that perpetuate this model, we're going to end up down the road with sort of locking ourselves into this crisis. And so that's something that we're focused on. And we had, the CEO of Unilever the other day was on a Pew webinar and sort of just flat out said, we need to get rid of sachets. And full stop. I think, we don't need products like that. We need to stop producing products like that. And hopefully governments can start to listen to their communities and really, just regulate those out of existence, which I think will accelerate innovation and likely put us in a better spot. So I just wanted to raise that point.
Absolutely. Go ahead, please, Kendall.
I agree. And if it's okay for me to chime in really fast, I wanted to kind of point out too that a lot of what we talk about when we talk about this stuff has to do with how we think about how we interact with plastic personally in our lives, like in our kitchens or, wherever else. And I would even say, building on what you were just speaking to, Graham, is that like there's a huge opportunity for all of us who, I'm sure, you know, everyone is working in some capacity in their lives professionally as well, and may even touch some of the processes that happen at their company that determine what type of packaging something goes in, what something is made out of, but also like what the procurement contracts look like and what's okay and acceptable within your company. And so thinking also about the other places that you have the ability to really ask questions about, like, is this the best way for it to be? Like, you know, yeah, we're making sachets, but like there was somebody who made that decision, but there's also a bunch of people who are maybe not asking questions about how you can innovate in a way that starts to take the environment into account in order to keep doing it. It's, you know, like, so basically, I'm just saying that like there's lots of ways to be asking questions of the work that you're doing in the world, whether that's professionally or personally, to start to shift the trend on this. And there's lots of folks who are already doing this work and asking those questions that should act as resources. It's the people on this panel, you know, who are rethinking how to develop reuse systems. Tom at Loop, you know, like how to rethink policy, how to rethink personal behavior, but also it's you know, folks in the Break Free from Plastic movement and others who are working on policy in the US and beyond on plastic. And there's a lot of resources out there, and it doesn't always just have to be about sustainability. It can also be about how to make things better. So that's also another perspective I wanted to kind of bring out.
Well, Kendall, to build on what you're saying, I think, you know, sometimes I feel like as individuals, we feel really unempowered. You know, we feel like it's the big companies who make stuff, the retailers who sell it, even the governments, you know, whose countries this occurs in, that are sort of making all the decisions, and we're sort of sheep to the slaughter, right? Let's say. And one of the things that's been really enlightening for me in this journey is that, in fact, the consumer, it's a sort of strange thing that the consumer is actually the most powerful voice in the whole equation, but just somehow doesn't realize it. You know, companies are not built to sell us what we don't want. They're in fact built to figure out what we want and get that to us in the cheapest, most convenient, most amazing way possible. And the real genius is get one step further, which is figure out what we want that we don't yet know we want. That's about as good as you can get. But think of it this way. You know, I love when I travel to go to supermarkets, because when you go into a supermarket of any country, wherever you are, you know, whether it's in Argentina or China, and you look at what's on the shelf, and not just what is on the shelf, but how much of what is on the shelf, that is a direct reflection of those people's desires. If more things get purchased, more of that shows up. If less of that gets purchased, less shows up. And that, you know, is an amazing opportunity, because we are voting for the future we want every day with what we buy. And as I was looking at some of the questions from the audience, which we're going to go to, you know, right away, you know, many people are asking, well, what can we do? And I think the most powerful thing that we can do is vote with our money for the future we want consciously. And I say that because I think we're actively voting for the future we want all day long with what we buy. We're just doing it unconsciously. And the most powerful vote, in fact, is the one where you don't buy anything at all. That is an active vote, by the way. And then when we buy, how do we vote for things that are, you know, without packaging, or reusable, or recyclable, or made from amazing recycled content? And so I want to go now, if I may, I'm going to, and please do, if you're tuning in, whether you've just joined us now or if you've been with us for the conversation, please feel free to type in in any questions into the comment window. And we're going to go to the first question. Rebecca, this is a specific question for you, which is, can you talk to us about some of the specific obstacles for Plastic-Free July, especially now, you know, living through a pandemic with this huge surge around personal protective equipment and other single-use plastic, you know, like e-com shopping and so on?
I think obviously the biggest challenge that people are facing is the around not being able to use their reusables, having to order things online, not having control and power over the packaging that they're using, and not always having the same choice that we did before. And as I said before, I think the opportunities are, and that's why our I think the whole plastic-free name and concept is a big challenge in itself, and that's why our motto and the tagline is choose to refuse single-use plastic, which goes back to that, do what you can where you are, and look for the opportunities as well to be less wasteful. Why are we wasting 40% of the food that we're buying when we can actually use those leftover veggies from last week to make a soup or a stock, instead of buying that in an unrecyclable plastic, multi-layered piece of packaging. So it is indeed a challenge, and there are obstacles there, but at the same time there's also opportunities to be more thoughtful, exactly as you said, Tom, about what we're purchasing, and also I think thinking about these injustices and thinking about our consumer voice as well. Like when we make that time to write to businesses that we buy their products from, so say, hey, love your product but hate the packaging. I think we don't quite realize, we shouldn't underestimate the power of our consumer voice as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And the next question I want to go to from the audience, this was asked by Marty, but then I was noticing Madison also asked the same question in a different way. So I'm going to sort of share both of them. And then whoever wants to jump in, please do. So Marty, as you can see on the screen here, says, how do we get less informed consumers and industry? So either individuals who may not be tuned in, to sustainability for lots of good reasons, or industries or companies that are, not as tuned in, to start thinking more about these topics and becoming responsible when they are not today legally responsible for this. And Madison asks it in a different way, but I thought it was just a really good way to frame it, which is, how can young adults help their parents change their more traditional mindsets on single-use plastics and all these topics? So, how do we shift, but not the people who are, enlightened to this and care about it, but especially the people who don't, or choose to think about different issues? How do we get them to lean in and stay leaning in? So whoever wants to jump in, maybe Graham, I'll ask you if you don't mind giving it a shot, because I know Greenpeace thinks a lot about this.
Sure, I can give it a shot. Yeah, so I think on the corporate side, finding that balance is a tricky one. And so I think we absolutely vote with our dollars. And that's a really powerful point and something we can do every day. And by not purchasing stuff, I love that point, Tom, as well. I think also voting at the ballot box and not forgetting the role that governments have to play in creating the incentives for business and sort of those guardrails that help businesses change. And so when we think about how companies can balance sort of designing their products in a way that reduces plastic or moves away from plastic, and then also thinking about end of life, we're going to accelerate innovation when governments sort of mandate that companies take responsibility for the full life of their products in a progressive and constructive way. And I think innovation can be a really powerful tool, but we're going to have to prioritize or set the values really clearly of what society needs to guide that innovation. And so we get the type of innovation we want, and not sort of innovation that reinforces the system that's problematic in the first place. Yeah, so that's my shot at it. And I think someone else, in terms of getting parents and others to be more engaged, I'll pass that one over.
I'm going to share some thoughts on this and then pass it to the other folks on the panel. Is, one of the ways to get corporates engaged. And I share this as not just around the topic of waste, reuse, recycling, recycled content, but around anything purposeful. And this is something I learned, I have to say, sort of painfully over 20 years of running TerraCycle, is that many times as a social organization, whether a for-profit or nonprofit, we lead with our mission because we care so deeply about our mission. TerraCycle and Loop, that's eliminate the idea of waste. And everyone here has very strong missions, and our staff, ourselves, we really care deeply. And we go to organizations with that as the leading principle. And that gets us in the front door. And if we find the right stakeholder in the organization we're talking to, it may even get a project, and the project may have some legs. But what I've realized is to really scale these solutions and to make them last and grow, we need to empathize deeply with the mission and the purpose of the organization we're trying to influence, and most importantly, whether we agree with that mission or purpose or not. The mission or purpose of the organization we're talking to may be as benign as maximize profit to shareholders and sell more product. You know, that's actually probably a mission that a lot of the organizations have as their core. And I just want to, you know, notice, even look at, you know, like the reactions we've all had, like that seems sort of, you know, trite and whatnot. But if we honor that, and then we think about how can they, in the short term, win on that mission by doing things that are purposeful, that will start opening the door and getting action to be taken. And then once it's sort of very similar to, like, Kendall, what Lonely Whale has done, where I think, you know, a lot of the organizations that have commercialized products using Oceanbound Plastic have won with them, you know, have succeeded commercially with them. And when they start seeing that, the magic to me is that the stakeholders in the organization that were sort of dismissing it as, oh, these are the tree huggers in the organization, you know, or so on, those folks who may not be as tuned in start leaning in. That's when scale really comes. And it starts speaking to the organization in the language they understand. And it becomes sort of a door opening that more ambitious, maybe longer term projects can start being considered. And then off we go from there. I know this at, you know, for us at TerraCycle, you know, we enter organizations first by saying, let's help you recycle what you can't recycle today. Then once they start doing that, then we say, well, let's help you start making products out of waste. And then when they start doing that, then we say, well, let's shift to reinventing your whole supply chain and making those products reusable. Progressively, each time it's a bigger and bigger and bolder step, but we got to think about how do we get that first step to even be taken, because it's very easy to focus on so many other important issues that are out there in the world today, and you know, not lean in. And I think it's so important that whether we're individuals, whether you know, we're trying to get our parents to do so or our friends, that, you know, we start generating that little bit of lean in, because then that can, you know, go further and further. Just to, there was a couple of questions from the audience asked around, and maybe I'm going to ask this, Kendall, to you, around ocean plastics and so on. Carla from Argentina asks, is it possible to clean up the oceans? You know, is this actually a possible thing, or not? I don't know, Kendall, how you know, maybe if you can start with that, and I know it's a big one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in terms of like completely cleaning the oceans, that we're in pretty deep at this point. I think the statistic is that there's 86 million metric tons of plastic in our oceans, and 8 to 12 million metric tons of plastic is entering our ocean every year. Pew just released a recent report that was saying that rate could that could triple by 2040. So the news isn't looking super great, but what that report did look at was potential solutions. And right now we're not on a very great trajectory, but they identified a bunch of solutions that really highlighted that if we were committed to approaching this issue from a very multifaceted, like, systems perspective, then we could reduce that by about 80% in terms of our impact. And, you know, just because we can't completely clean the oceans and wipe out every piece of microplastic doesn't mean it's not worth it to try and continue to turn off the tap and reinvent and recreate the systems that are creating the problem in the first place. Because the thing is plastic in the oceans is a problem. The plastic that's there now will continue to be a problem, but really where the potential is how we start to really see, identify, and then innovate towards a better world. And I really think the fact that the plastic problem is so dispersed and affects the entire, like, ecosystems across the world. It's not just oceans, it's our, like, land too. And the fact that that happens is actually really great, because it highlights our need to become more better stewards of our environment and better, like, members of the, like, Earth ecosystem that we live in. So it's a really tangible thing. So I used to work more on climate change issues directly, and specifically climate adaptation. And it was always so hard because it's something that's really hard to grasp. It's hard to grasp impact. It's hard to grasp progress. With plastic, it's right in front of you, and it's something that we can look at and we can tangibly see, and we can understand when it's being cleaned up. We can understand when we're using less of it. And so it's like, I say that it isn't about completely cleaning the oceans. It's about building a world where sustainability is the better option, where it's the cooler, sexier thing that you want to do, regardless of whether or not you actually care, or whether or not what you're deciding, you're starving in an airport and you need to buy a packaged sandwich or like a salad with a fork, like that moment, you shouldn't be thinking about the ocean. You should be thinking about, like, okay, like, I'm hungry, I'm going to like feed myself with this nutritious salad. And then you should also have options available to you that aren't a plastic fork or a plastic container. And that's more the system that it makes more sense to create. And why, cleaning the ocean is a great goal, but it's less about how do we have a clean ocean, and how do we work towards a healthy ocean that still allows us as humans in our society and our culture to flourish and also still be able to enjoy the resources that we have access to. Like, hopefully that was inspiring.
Yeah, it's a tough one because it is an incredibly daunting issue. I think if you add up all of the really noble efforts that are happening on ocean cleanups, from a whole range of organizations, what has been taken out probably in a year's time is what goes in probably in a few minutes' time. And so the scale of this is just astronomical, and it continues to get bigger as and this is a challenge of as we develop. Waste is a luxury, and so the more wealth an individual has, right, the more chance that person's going to produce more waste. And it's almost directly linear to that because we like the idea of consuming, and if and that's an animal tendency. There's famous examples, where you put a pile of sugar in front of a mouse, it will, gorge itself. And so it's not in our nature to resist consumption because, historically we've lived in a world where we have to expend a lot of energy to get stuff. The problem is everything is so easy to get right now. You hardly have to do anything. We don't have to, go and forage or hunt or grow something. We click a button and it shows up prepared, ready to go, whatever that object may be. And we've also, that's having this interesting philosophical conversation with someone is, most animals have figured out how to consume a very limited range of things. As human beings have somehow figured out how to consume absolutely everything. There is a use for everything out there, and we have figured out how to get it and consume it, no matter what it is, not just, food and so on, but I mean, absolutely everything. I want to pivot to another question. This came in from Celine, and this is a really interesting one. It talks about, I'm not going to read out the whole question because you can see it on screen, or it'll come back on screen. Oh, here we are in a moment. But it talks about this idea of the value of plastic. And why I think this question is a really important one is that, again, what makes something recyclable is whether a waste management company can make money. What the waste pickers in India or in Brazil collect are what they can make money on. And in fact, producers tend to use recycled plastics if they are typically the same quality and the same price as virgin plastics. And this is where if the price of oil, as the price of oil goes down, recycling becomes less competitive, which means if oil prices go down, less things locally become recyclable, and typically less recycled content is used. And this is really challenging because this whole thing is tied up not in can something be recycled, but in the business equation of can something be recycled at a profit. So I want to first start with maybe Kendall on this, because you guys deal with this directly on NextWave. How much of that pressure do you see from the partners that you work with on, hey, we'll use Oceanbound Plastic, but only if it's cost competitive and performance competitive to, let's say, the virgin plastic we may have been using before? Is that top of mind or not? And if it isn't, how do you get that to be the case?
Absolutely. It is absolutely top of mind. And I think it's really driven by a lot of what you talked about before, that, to be a successful company in this day and age, like, it really is about shareholders and profits and being able to deliver those year over year. And so it's part of the equation. I think to a certain extent, it will always be a part of the equation. But that actually provides an opportunity for innovation, and because it's one of the criteria that you have to balance in order to drive things forward. And I think that particularly when it comes to Oceanbound Plastic, which is the area I'm most familiar with, having it be something that these companies are willing to invest in, want to invest in, are very motivated to push forward these initiatives, they're able to rethink maybe how that equation comes together around the cost of that material and how it fits into their overall investment of how the economics of a product particularly work. Sometimes it means that they have to get creative, but a lot of times it also means that they need to work with their suppliers in a proactive way to be able to help drive forward that market. And I think that with Oceanbound Plastic in particular, there's more of this relationship with the entire supply chain that doesn't exist with other products. Most of the time, companies will go out to their tier one supplier, the one that basically manufactures the product, and they're like, give me this thing, and then the thing arrives, and that's about as much insight as they might have in any given supply chain. Not all, but many. And so, when you're starting to talk about sustainability and needing to take a closer look, and the fact that consumers are demanding this, and that markets are demanding it, that then you're looking more holistically at the entire supply chain and are able to have both more impact, but also more of an ability to kind of tailor things to what the market conditions are also going to allow, because that's still a very real part of what we need to consider as we're thinking about what a sustainable product looks like, what a good recycling market looks like. I also think that there's a huge role for investing in recycling and recovery, reuse programs, things like that, and purposefully not investing in oil and gas, regardless of the price of virgin. And there are people who are looking into ways to do that. And a lot of that will also probably depend on policy levers, much like Graham was talking about, just based on the fact that that's kind of the way things are at the moment. I don't know, Graham, if you have any things that you know of that are in the works that can help to push us in that direction to flip the equation. But it's something that I definitely am looking for.
Yeah, it's a good question, Kendall. I think the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is one that's making its way through Congress, unlikely to pass in this administration, but something that sets that framework for where we need to go, kind of speaking to your point.
So, folks, we're just about coming to time, and I want to conclude by asking each of you, what should someone who's tuned into this conversation, what should they do next? What action would you recommend someone take as we leave this discussion and go about our day, noting that we have folks who've called in from all over the world, from New Zealand to Brazil, Argentina, all over. What should they do next? And we'll just go around a circle. Maybe, Rebecca, we'll start with yourself.
I think, as I said before, because what we can all do is so different, particularly at this point in time, Tom, I think that we can all choose one thing. So whether it's reducing the plastics in our own life, whether it's writing to businesses, whether it's engaging your family through saying, hey, I'm going to do this dinner and it's going to be plastic free, or taking an initiative into your workplace, looking at the plastics that are in the office and in the kitchen and in your workplace, finding that one thing that you can do and taking action on that. Because I think actions do speak louder than words, and even if you might not realise, I think we actually have more impact in the doing rather than just the talking about.
Thank you, Rebecca. And we'll go to Graham.
Yeah, so thanks, Tom. So join Greenpeace, obviously, and sign our petition to push corporations and governments to change. I think one of the things that's really important is for folks to think about this systemically as much as you can and sort of question some of the assumptions around convenience and things that have been put forward to connect them more with values and opportunities to move in the direction that's more authentic, holistic, and away from disposability. Because my recycle bin, for example, fills up way too often, and I know a lot of that doesn't get recycled. And so in that little sort of aha moment, it's like, where can we reduce and what can we do as an individual? But also thinking about that as part of a broader systemic approach and really a rejection of the throwaway culture that has been sold to us for the past 75 years from the corporate sector. So it's pushing back on companies, engaging your local coffee shops, and thinking about ways that you can build those relationships to help explain the opportunities and better choices that the businesses can make. And then also, I think, engaging governments in voting and just being an active participant in our society, because I know in our capitalist world, we like to believe that the markets will solve everything for us, but we need the public sector to step up. And I think we're heading into an era of increased government participation and engagement on a number of issues, including investment in recovery from this current crisis. And so big opportunities to make better choices, and your elected officials need to hear from you just as companies do.
Absolutely. And Kendall?
So I'll go ahead and plug as well, follow Lonely Well. We also have a podcast that is launching in the next week or so here called 52 Hertz that's coming out, that's really highlighting the work of environmentalists and activists, people who are working in this space, that change makers who are thinking about this. And a lot of it has to do with plastic, but it's not all about that. It's about how they're thinking proactively about their work and their lives and how they can make a difference in their communities. And in addition to consuming some of the information about this issue and understanding the issue itself, I would say, building on what both you guys, Rebecca and Graham, said, is really about bringing a lens to your life and the way where you work. It's about kind of thinking, but just asking the questions about the stuff that you're interacting with on a daily basis, both in terms of whether you need it and how it can do better, how it could be better, and then proactively, pursuing change, whether that's just speaking to your neighbors and your friends and your family, or gifting things like reusable silverware and stuff like that allows that helps to empower people and gives them solutions that they can have right in their backpack, or but also, just recognizing that, like I said, this issue is a very holistic issue. And so whatever it is that really hits you in the heart about this issue, whether it's the ocean perspective or the waste perspective or the environmental justice perspective, finding the intersectionality of plastic with the other stuff that matters, will help to kind of figure out what the specific niche and the specific lens that you can bring to this issue is, and then will allow you to really understand how you personally can help to move the needle in terms of this plastic pollution issue and reduce it and bring us to a better world.
Thank you so much. Folks, everyone, thank you first and foremost to the panel for coming together today and for celebrating the 10th anniversary of Plastic Free July. Please, everyone, get involved. Please visit Plastic Free July's website, Greenpeace. Jen just put up a link to a petition there, Lonely Whale. You can also check out TerraCycle and Loop. Thank you so much, and especially thank you to the folks that came to listen. I think the biggest conclusion I have is, let's take action and vote. Vote with what we do, what we buy, what political forces do we put in power, and what things we get attracted to, because that's what our friends will be attracted to. And we can really make a lot of change simply by shifting how we look at this issue personally. Thank you so much to everyone. Wish you a fantastic morning, afternoon, wherever in the world you are. Thank you for joining us for this great discussion.
Thanks, everybody.
You.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.